Hello, everybody. My name is Eric Sager. I'm the COO at Plaid, and I'm incredibly excited to welcome Tracy Meng, who is the VP of Global Partnerships at Checkout. Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you.
As many of you know, at Plaid, we actually never charge consumers, and we only charge developers when they make successful API calls. So one of the things from the very beginning that was really important for us was to build strong partnerships across the ecosystem to make sure that it's very easy for all of you to be able to develop and implement and scale your solutions. And so we've had a fantastic partnerships with Checkout for quite some time. So maybe, Tracy, we'll start the conversation by you just sharing a little bit more about your own professional journey, what brought you to Checkout, and then how does Checkout fit into the broader ecosystem?
Yeah, awesome. Well, first of all, thank you, Eric. Thanks to the Plaid team for having me. It's been an awesome day so far. Saw some really cool launches. Have been a fan of Plaid from the sidelines for a while now, so great to be here. As Eric mentioned, I'm Tracy. I lead partnerships and partner engineering at Checkout. We are an international payment service provider that combines gateway processing and acquiring all under one single API. And we power payments for merchants like Klarna and Wise, so a lot of fintechs that overlap with the Plaid ecosystem. In the crypto space, we actually power the on-off ramps on the fiat side for the likes of blockchain.com and Coinbase, as well as some of the crypto payment players like MoonPay, so we're the underlying acquirer. So I mention all these names because there's obviously a lot of overlap with the Plaid family. What we don't do is a lot of what Plaid does, which is the account verification, the balance checks, and so that's why this partnership made so much sense. It was, Eric was one of the first, I guess I should say the last meetings I took in person before the pandemic. We were in the Plaid offices, and then the world shut down. But anyway, it was a really great chat because we were just talking about, all of our shared customers, our shared vision for fintech, but the fact that our products were super complementary made for a great partnership. And so we're really excited now that we have this partnership in place. And thanks to, I think, the transfers team for the shout out earlier. So yeah, I started my career at Bain as well as Eric. So similar to, and I think Zach, a lot of folks at Plaid or ex-Bainies, but really got hooked into fintech probably before fintech was even a word. So I was at Google and helped launch Google Wallet, Google Pay, all of the different iterations. And then I've now been at Checkout for 2 years. I joined the company right before the pandemic. So that brings me to where I am today.
It's pretty amazing to have a see come full circle like that. I do remember the last meeting right before we shut it all down, being there in the office with you, and now to be able to have you here in person. It's fantastic. One of the things that we hear a lot about is kind of this term of embedded finance. And that's certainly something that a lot of people have top of mind. How do you define that for yourself, and what role does Checkout play in that?
Yeah, and I think this is, again, the fintech sort of story is just beginning. I think we're in the midst of writing the history books. And I think in order to kind of frame up embedded finance, I always like to look back. And so if you look at the past 10 years and how far we've come in kind of building the infrastructure and the building blocks of fintech, Plaid has done the hard work of connecting to all the banks necessary to get the data and that 95% coverage. And what Checkout has done is we've spent a lot of time building the direct connections to the schemes, getting our local acquiring licenses in every jurisdiction possible. And this is the foundational layer. I think, to use an analogy, maybe it's like we're building almost like the fintech OS, the operating system. And I think the next 10 years, like when we look to the future, I really do think embedded finance is the future. It's the applications that can be built on top of this infrastructure, on top of this OS. That's super exciting. I think Alex talked about it a little bit too, which is, these sort of embedded fintech plays are, the dentist platform that is able to, embed payments, or, we were just recently talking about a platform that manages the fleet of scooters for different scooter companies. And so these niche applications can now build on top of fintech, which really harkens back to the original goal and mission of fintech, which is to increase access to financial services when previously, these financial services were maybe only something that, if you were a company of a big enough size or if you're a person of a high enough net worth that you could have access to. And now we're kind of increasing that access to this infrastructure, and then we're allowing these applications, these real world applications to be built on top. So I think that's what's really exciting about the future of embedded finance. I think, Checkout is excited to play a role in that in terms of, powering the payments for these players that can now become kind of their own payments play, but be really targeted in their specific vertical or use case.
How do you think about the competitive landscape there? I mean, one of the things I think we've seen is you have some players that are going more for breadth, and then others who are kind of investing more in kind of the depth. And when you give customers and folks advice, like how do you think people should think about that trade-off?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest piece of advice we like to give our customers is basically what any disciplined product manager should do, which is to A/B test your providers, right? I mean, first of all, if the good providers, they'll be easy enough to integrate that you can integrate multiple of them, and if they're not, that's probably a red flag. But once you do have kind of these multiple providers and you can A/B test them, that's really when the proof is in the pudding. And I think especially if you're at a large enough scale where a single decline transaction can mean not just lost revenue, but lost customer lifetime value, that's when it gets really important to actually look into the details. Checkout actually, a lot of our growth over the years, I think a lot of people maybe heard about us in recent years in the press with all of the funding and valuations, but really we've kind of grown at this steady clip where we would work with merchants and start with one geography or start with a certain amount of volume, and then over time the merchant sees that their acceptance rates are higher with us, and they start moving more and more volume to us, and that's really how we've grown. It's a lot of organic growth, and we're really proud of that. And just the other day I was our sales team was talking about a major crypto exchange, was using, and I'm allowed to say this, I think, but they were using, Stripe, and they turned us on. The acceptance rates were significantly higher with Checkout, and within 2 weeks they turned off Stripe. And it could go in either direction, I'm sure, but we're up for the challenge. I think that's, our goal is to build the best payment product out there, so that our customers can really take advantage, and that every transaction that goes through, we have the best chances of getting that accepted, because we know that those dollars matter and those customers matter. So yeah, I think the A/B testing is kind of the first piece of advice that I think every company should think about. I think it kind of lends itself to kind of a broader, you mentioned kind of breadth versus depth, and I think the flip side to that is kind of, when you're choosing a provider, try to optimize for providers that have those direct connections and have gone deep, because what that means is it's, fewer points of failure. It means that they're not just putting a layer on top of another provider, and honestly, it's probably in those cases a little bit less cost effective, because they're essentially passing on that cost and then putting a margin on top. So I think the flip side of that is be wary of maybe providers that do claim to do everything, right? Because a lot of times they are taking those shortcuts and embedding or kind of wrapping other providers. So I think Plaid has done the hard work again over the past 10 years of kind of building those direct integrations. Same with Checkout. We've really been a little bit quieter in the past, but it's because we were working hard on all of these integrations.
I mean, that definitely resonates. I mean, you heard John and Yi talk about this morning. We spend the majority of our effort on just making our existing connections, our existing products better. Obviously, always looking towards the future and trying to innovate, but really important for us to make sure that the solutions that our customers depend on are truly kind of best in class. And that's a conversation I actually have a lot with new customers and prospects. The first thing I talk to them about is, have you A/B tested us? Just get the data, because that oftentimes makes those conversations much easier once everybody just has the facts in front of them and they can see how good the different solutions kind of really are in practice.
100%.
One of the things that you all are really known for is obviously the international aspect of it, right? The ability to kind of process payments around the world in many different markets. If you had to give folks advice on how to think about that kind of internationally, particularly if they have a use case that spans multiple geographies, how do you think folks should go about that?
Yeah, so I mean, the way I explain it to my mom, for example, is like, you know, the complexities of international money movement is kind of analogous to the complexities of international people movement. So, you know, you're traveling to other countries, you're at border control. I'm trying to visit, you know, your hometown in Frankfurt, Germany, and you know,
it's a beautiful town, beautiful.
Flying Lufthansa.
I can highly recommend it. Yes.
And you know, you're at border control, and you know, I have an American passport. You know, someone next to me may have a French or German passport, and they get to kind of fast track. They get the short line, right? They get to go through border control really fast. And the reason is the border control recognizes their documentation, knows kind of right away that you know they're an EU citizen, and so you can get through the line much more quickly than I. And then there's probably people who are from other countries who, you know, maybe have even harder of a time, or you know, maybe even need more paperwork because they're not in the Schengen region. You know, so I think that compounds, and in the same way with money movement, when it comes to the you know, someone going online, going to you know your website or your app, and they're trying to pay with a certain credit card that you know is issued by a certain region. There's the same dynamic of, is that recognized by that locality? Is it, do you have the right documentation to prove that this card is legitimate? And is the issuing bank and the acquiring bank speaking the same language and able to kind of get you through that fast lane? And I think if you're, you know, if you're growing global business and you start having a lot of business in Germany or UK or whatever it is, you know, one thing to think about that, you know, is even just beyond sort of like the payments aspect of things is thinking about, you know, setting up an entity, because I think that'll help you kind of get into that fast track lane, help you establish legitimacy in that local geography. But then once you do, you can really start taking advantage of local acquiring, and that's what Checkout does the best, right? We've really focused on having these local acquiring licenses so that, you know, not only in the EU, but we actually went a step further and got our UK license as well. We're actually the only PSP that has both the UK and the EU license. And what that does is it bumps up the acceptance rates for UK and EU, because then we can be even more specific about, you know, getting that transaction through and kind of checking all the boxes from a regulatory and kind of a local checks standpoint. So I think that's kind of like the fundamentals of, you know, why cross-border or, you know, international payments can be complex. But if you kind of set up the right things, if you have the right providers, it can actually be an asset for you. The other things to keep in mind are obviously the alternative payment methods, and in the payment industry we call them alternative, but it's actually a misnomer, because you know, you go to these countries and the local payment method, the alternative payment method, is actually the primary payment method, and they don't think of it as an alternative. So you have to think about how your customers are paying in these local geographies and make sure you're offering those payment methods. And then on top of that, I think the last piece I'll just mention is currency risk, especially in the macroeconomic environment that we're in today. You want to make sure that if you're operating business in, you know, these different geographies, let's say you have UK operations, that when you receive, you know, payments in GBP, you can just keep it in GBP, right? It's like for like settlement. You don't have to convert it to USD and then convert it back to GBP. That's when you take on FX risk. That's when you take on currency costs. And if you streamline that, if you have a provider that can give you like-for-like settlement, it's really, really powerful, and it can save you a lot of money. So I think that those are kind of the nuances that you know, I've learned, especially at Checkout, because you know, this is what we do.
Are there any major friction points in that you feel you haven't quite solved yet that you're looking forward to addressing?
I mean, I think the world is big. So I think it's just hard for, and again, like I think we don't pretend to you know, be everything to everyone, and I think we try to do what we do really well. And I think that goes for geographies as well. Like, we're not going to be in every corner of the earth or every country just yet. In the countries that we are in, we want to be the local acquirer. We want to offer all of the right settlement currencies, and we want to offer the best experience. But there's still a lot of work for us to do in growing our geographical reach, expanding to new markets, obviously. And especially in the emerging markets. There's so much exciting stuff happening there. You know, we opened up, you know, Pakistan during the pandemic, huge, huge market, and so there's a lot of really exciting opportunity there.
I'd love to, how do you go about making that decision? Because I mean, from a Plaid perspective, you know, we started in the US, we expanded into Canada, we've expanded into Europe, and kind of have continued to cover more and more countries there, as Ripsy spoke about this morning. How do you make that decision at checkout? How do you decide when you're ready to go to the next market, and then how do you decide specifically which market to pursue?
Yeah, so I think, you know, we do a lot of, you know, it's a combination of kind of the top-down and the bottom-up input. So first of all, we have all these enterprise merchants that are global, and they themselves, I think one of the presenters earlier was talking about, you know, hey, recurring transactions, that was like, you know, the biggest ask that we get, and so that's how you guys prioritize it. The same way, we have merchants who are telling us, you know, they want this certain geography or they want this certain payment method, and that's the easiest way for us to prioritize because we're solving customer pain points right then and there. So that's usually our first, you know, our highest priority is just serving our existing customers and serving them well. I think beyond that, there's obviously, you know, there's some sort of, you know, strategizing that we can do around, you know, where our competitors are and where we can be and where we can offer a differentiated service. And I think that's good for the global ecosystem, right? If there's gaps in the market today, then, you know, those are opportunities for us to fill.
The other thing I always like to ask people about is if you, in these times it can be difficult, right? But if you had to make a prediction or a couple of predictions around the next 12 to 18 months in terms of how both payments but also kind of the broader ecosystem will continue to evolve, how do you think about that?
So I think embedded finance and embedded payments is definitely you know, key. But I think there's also, what's interesting about that is there's also a balancing act. So it's kind of a caveat, but it's also a prediction, which is that I think there's kind of a lot of excitement for non-fintechs, right, to embed fintech and financial services. I think that's really, really great. I think to what extent you embed that, right, to what extent you build out a compliance team in-house, to what extent you actually take on, you know, all of the regulatory risk. There has already been, and I think there will continue to be, a little bit of a step back to say, actually, it's probably best if we use providers who have this lockdown in-house versus building it in-house. And it's kind of, I think in the last talk they were talking about kind of that build by partner dynamic. And I think, you know, the initial tendency may be to kind of build everything yourself. But I think there's probably going to be a little bit of a reactionary effect where people are realizing, and I think there's many players in the space you see who have realized it, that, you know, I think, you know, they realize that it's actually really hard to run a compliance team in-house. You know, we've seen this happen time and time again where a customer comes to us, they're like, oh, we want to be a PayFac, and then they realize they don't want to be a PayFac. So I think that dynamic will ring true. I think, you know, what I love about kind of the embedded fintech story is, I think Zach used to always talk about like Uber as like the first, you know, example of the company that, you know, was not a fintech and started to offer, you know, Uber Money and fintech products embedded. And we're starting to see more and more of that, like, you know, DoorDash and MindBody using, you know, Paraffin to launch, you know, their capital as a service products. So I think we're going to see definitely more and more of that. But I think what's great is that I think it's not just going to be the Ubers or the DoorDashes that have all of these resources who can do it. It's going to be, you know, that dentist platform or, you know, the scooter platform that I was talking about that can easily use these services. And I think it kind of continues that story that we have of, you know, how are we disrupting traditional financial institutions by opening up more access broadly.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen that same evolution at Plaid. When we, you know, in the early days, most of our customers were fintechs, and now we're seeing more and more institutions and big banks and others becoming customers as well, in addition to the data access partnerships that we have. And then you have a lot of tech companies and other players that are embedding financial solutions. I mean, we have John Deere as a customer, which is incredible.
No way.
Yeah, it's like when I started, if you would have told me one day we'll have John Deere as a key customer, but it makes total sense. You know, I think their solutions, right, like for farmers are ones that like you actually have a lot of embedded financial solutions that are really, really relevant there. And so kind of being along for that journey. from a checkout perspective, what are some of the use cases that you're most excited about? Because that is truly like one of the things I've loved the most about Plaid is just seeing all the amazing things that people end up building, many of which none of us, certainly not me, would have ever imagined, right? And you just kind of, you put these tools in people's hands and they end up building these amazing things for consumers, for others. How do you think about that at checkout? Are there some use cases where you're just like, wow, I never thought somebody would use checkout in exactly that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I joined Checkout, I think my leaning was e-commerce and kind of this classic pay-ins use case, and I think more and more we're starting to see that other direction, payouts, be really powerful in a lot of use cases. And one thing that I've learned as an American going in and seeing kind of the way like Europe does things is they have just so much acceptance for the concept of pay to card, so paying out to my credit or my debit card, that being instant, using Visa, Direct, and MasterCard Send rails. And I think that's a really cool use case because then you can offer kind of these platform plays where you're paying out gig workers or you're paying out the SMBs on your platform. And there's kind of that two-way street, right? It's not just about paying into a merchant. It's this dynamic of you're a platform play and you have all of these sub-entities. And then it's also just, I think, again, like the increased access of that means that you get money back into the hands of people who can then, especially in this economic environment, you're like an Uber driver, for example, that was one of our clients that used this payout service. You want to be able to get that money right away. You don't want to have to wait. I think another product that you guys announced was kind of same day versus having to wait for kind of that ACH payout. And same with when it comes to payout to card. So I think it's things like that are we can only be so creative on this stage and talking about it. It's really the developer community. It's really the people that are actually in the trenches seeing the real world applications that are going to think more creatively than we are and using these types of tools.
One last question for you, which I always try to dodge this question because it always makes me feel like I have to choose, which one of my kids I love the most. What's your favorite fintech app? Ooh.
Oh man, I think I'm super biased because my husband works for Robinhood, so and we had Surabhi earlier, but I still use it.
He might not be watching, so you can be honest. You can be honest with us.
He's probably not, but no, I think it's a great app. I'm still long Robinhood. So.
Long Robinhood, awesome. Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing all your thoughts with us today and joining us. And I appreciate you making the time. And thank you again.
Thanks so much.
All right.